Good morning and welcome to Valley Views. I'm your host, Glenn Edison. I'm certainly glad to have you today. And as always, we want to thank BTC Fiber who sponsors our program. And you can see these interviews on BTC Fiber's YouTube page as well as BTC Fiber's cable channel 18. And we also want to thank our sponsors to our program, Embers Ice Cream of Pikeville, Nickel Roll Antique of Pikeville, and White Wagon Bed and Breakfast of Pikeville also. So if you're in Pikeville, go by and see those fine folks. And today we have with us Robert Elliott. He's a retired 20 years. Retired 20 years Army Major. And Robert, it's good to have you today. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for your service.
Yes, my honor.
Appreciate that. And today we're here to talk with Robert. First of all, a little bit of his background of his service, and then about a book that he's written. And we'll get into that book in just a minute. So, Robert, first of all, let's talk about your career in the military. What caused you to want to get into the military, and how long have you been in the service?
Sure. Well, I grew up in the 70s, a young child, and of course that was the end of the Vietnam War. And I recall even as a child seeing some of the video, and and I had relatives that served in different conflicts from World War II to Vietnam. And so I reflect back on those that chose to, in many cases. Some folks are drafted, as we know, but served their nation in a time of need. And so I saw that as very compelling to do something bigger than yourself, right? And that I admired folks that did public service, and that was sort of the encouragement I needed.
Well, good, because I know, of course, back, like as you mentioned, during the 70s, there was a lot of anti-military because of Vietnam War and everything that went on. And so it was hard to be someone to get a little respect in the military at that time.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a difficult time for our nation and for those that served, but they still served and raised their right hand and took an oath and followed through with that oath. And they knew there were risks involved, and as you know, many didn't come back.
Right.
And so I saw that as such a the willingness to sacrifice, not necessarily for anything other than the person to their right and their left, right? Those that were serving next to them was such a bond, and I just admired that.
Well, and when we get into the military, you're talking about, as you mentioned, probably for modern day, we're thankful for World War II vets or Vietnam veterans, and then of course where you served in Iraq. But especially me growing up, and of course we're about the same age, we're talking about World War II and Vietnam. Those are the ones that really set the pace for the current day military.
Absolutely, and I reflect that on my book, and I comment on that perspective that I have because of those that went before us.
Right, and they're the ones, I mean, I can look back to them because I had members of my family that served in Vietnam, and even my own father served in Vietnam. And so, you look back at that and comparing, and then you look at today's military where the young men who are entering the service, I mean, they're doing it because they want to.
Absolutely, there's no draft, and again, I don't distinguish between folks that were drafted back in past conflicts or that chose to volunteer. But yeah, the ones today it's solely a volunteer service right now. You're absolutely correct.
And that makes it, to me, it makes it even better being voluntary because people enlist because they want to.
Yeah, there's no question. They can't point a finger and say, Uncle Sam told me to. They are choosing to. You're absolutely right.
I know, and of course, in my case, I was epileptic, so I couldn't enlist and couldn't be drafted as well. So, we, I mean, I wanted to. I would have served, but I couldn't, and so that's what makes me thankful for the men who do.
Yeah, and as you know, there's so many that farmers, right? Police officers, firefighters, medical folks, some deploy, but we need some folks back here in our country. We just couldn't send them all in, no matter what conflict or war. And so they served here. And as you pointed out, there's some that just couldn't. But whether they could or couldn't or did or didn't, especially this community is so supportive of our veterans, I've found, and most communities, I'd say, across our nation are, and that gives folks encouragement no matter how long ago they served.
Right. It encourages me to see. I know sometimes one of the I won't call it a complaint, but some of the local veterans say, well, there's veterans here that won't be involved, and but we need to understand that, of course, that's a choice to join the local VFW and American Legion post here, but it's a service I always, because I know every time I hear the national anthem played, especially at football games that I announce, I think for some reason in my mind, I hear those jets flying over, the bombs going off, and I hear the men fighting and hollering, and it just means that much to me to think about the people who've gone on before me.
Absolutely, and I'll just comment, there's some veterans among us that had such a challenging experience through no fault of their own, they don't even like 4th of July because it brings back memories. There's some of our veterans that don't talk about any of their experiences, and don't fault them at all, but that was another motivation for me to write this book, Glenn, and that I decided 18 years later that I'm going to write a book based on the notes that I made day in and day out, and I'm going to tell my story, and maybe that'll resonate with those folks who are not comfortable, but through my book they can see maybe some of their experiences and relate to being away from family, being in harm's way, the feeling you get when you get back home, the feeling you get when somebody's not coming home because they're in a flag-covered casket,
right.
And all those emotions. And I don't want to bring up any negative memories, but I think it will help maybe some cope, if you will, because they know that there's stories out there that they can relate to, and maybe it'll lead to conversations with me or others, and that's so important. And I'll just point out one more thing. We know that on average 22 veterans a day are committing suicide, and that's 22 too many. And again, a lot of times it's everything that's locked in internally. So whatever we can do, any of us, to show our appreciation, but further to gently have those conversations or let them share what they choose to share in a safe environment, I think might affect those numbers and reduce it because they don't feel like they're all alone.
Right. Excuse me. Right. Because sometimes, like the people with PTSD and things like that, like you said, that draws them away from celebrating and doing things, right. And then they feel they're withdrawn and they don't talk, and
sure.
And like you said, they wind up being maybe one of those 22 a day.
Yes.
And which is sad. Well, let's talk about your book.
Okay.
A little bit. That's the sole reason we're here.
Okay.
But we've got a little background though.
Yes.
So what inspired you to start? I know you got your little journal you kept.
Mm-hmm.
What was the reason for that?
Well, there's no assurances when you leave. So when I left 18 years ago in 2004 for a year or more to go in Iraq, I had 3 young children, 12, 14, and 16. Challenging ages in the best of circumstances, right? My oldest just learned to drive. My youngest was a preteen. And my wife suddenly became a single parent for more than a year. So, kudos to her and all the military wives and military
right.
moms and military families, because we sort of get all the attention, right, on Veterans Day, but they're the ones in the background that had to deal with day in and day out issues. So I knew I wanted to share that with my kids and eventually my grandkids. That kind of motivated me to do that. And I knew I wanted to, but it's been 18 years, so why haven't I done it yet, right? And I was so happy to be home that I took all my items that I brought back, put them in boxes and put them in the attic, and there they stayed. Like so many of veterans did, right? They owe their family to not do the military stuff anymore or spend extra time. But I tell you what happened was, and I write this about it in the book, a local gentleman, Fred Holcomb, he turns 91 today, his birthday, and he's a Korean War veteran. Mm-hmm. And he went in the military at 18. At 19, he was in Korea in combat, and he ran out of ammunition in one of the battles and tried to evade the enemy. At some point he was captured in this cold, bitter cold weather. And he didn't tell that story for over 70 years until recently. Really? A friend from his hometown, a Vietnam combat veteran, connected with him, and he gave the oral history of some of those experiences. I'm thinking, if wow. Fred can do this after 70 years, he was a POW for more than 6 months. Wow. In Korea. Could you imagine the conditions and minus 30 degrees? So nonetheless, I started thinking that I have no excuse left. My kids are grown. I need to write this book. And I did just that. Citizen soldier from the land of Lincoln to Iraq and back, because so many, for whatever reason, haven't written a book. And so I was inspired recently by a Sequatchie County veteran.
Well, that's interesting.
Yes.
Because probably a lot of, I know when, as we mentioned earlier, a lot of veterans, when they come back from in battle zones, they don't want to talk about it because
Yes.
it is traumatic. I mean, you have to do things that you don't normally want to do, and even killing someone if you had to, killing the enemy. You know, I'm sure that's traumatic. But coming back and, like I say, taking the notes of what's going on, because those are things. Because if you, I found out if you don't write stuff down, you forget them.
Yes.
And by you doing that, you at least have some of the memories that you've written down that you have kept, and now you're going to share with us.
Yes.
Now the book company. I know sometimes companies are hard to get to publish.
Sure.
How did you come up with your company? How did it come about?
Sure. Well, writing a book, I've learned, is time-consuming and expensive. Book publishers, like any other organizations, are not volunteer organizations. They're for profit in most cases. And so if they have somebody that's famous that wants to write a book, they're all about that because they know they're going to sell those books.
Right.
Selling books generates revenue for them. If they know that somebody's a bestseller, they're going to help them along the way because it's likely they're going to sell more books. Right. But how do you start off when you're a first-time publisher and you're a military guy that never wrote or published anything before in this manner? And so how did I find out? Through another veteran, a Navy veteran that I'm familiar with through an entrepreneur program actually was in the process of writing a book, and on social media he was making comments about how it was helpful and the support. Well, it found out Book Creators is an organization that helps first-time authors. That's who their target audience is. I thought, well, this is me. And I did some more background, and if this veteran, who's a sharp person, did investigation and he found this was credible and authentic, then that's good. And I'll just very briefly, it's a professor at Georgetown University, so in our nation's capital, and he has these students in his class, and he thought, I want them to be able to write a book in one semester. Sounds challenging. Well, they don't necessarily publish it, but they do the manuscript in 6 months. Wow. That was the model he adopted, and then he expanded it to other folks that aren't at the university. And so that was the organization that I contacted. He has a conversation with everybody that has an interest for on the phone, and there's there's an upfront cost of $1,000, but for that you get 6 months, and of course everything's online now. But you not only have a developmental editor that you contact and talk with every week about your writing, but you also have a group of 15, 20, 30 of these 200 authors that in your group you contact virtually, Zoom meetings, and you have conversations about how things are going, suggestions. And for 6 months, I went from 0 words from my journal, well, not journal, but 0 written for a book, and took those little snippets and paragraphs and ended up with 57,000 words 7 months later. And that was my draft manuscript, and then I had to decide what I was going to do from there.
Oh, well, that's neat.
Yes.
That's a good story within itself, because I know there's a lot of publishing companies out there. Some of the self-publishing companies, and they're expensive.
Yes.
Because they want your money.
Yes, as you said, it's a business,
and rightfully so. But when you can find a good publishing company that has really you at heart, you're their concern about getting your work out. That's always nice to hear.
And let me just add, so Creators Institute gets you that manuscript, right? It gets that tight manuscript of 23 chapters in my case, and you can go to any publisher you want after that. They've done their duties of getting you that manuscript, but they do partner with New Degree Press. And that's a hybrid publisher, meaning that it's not independent publishing, but it's not the large publishing houses that look for the sales, astronomical sales, so they can make a lot of money. And so there's a pathway that they provide you, and they give you a developmental editor, they give you a cover designer, they give you marketing folks, and they have a platform that you follow. And if you partner with them, then obviously you're going to have to compensate them. But through your book sales and pre-sales, it helps offset some of those costs. So it's more achievable for the everyday person, the first-time author. And so I partnered with them, and so in the next 4 months through the editing process and the cover design, we'll have things completely copy edited and shipped out in January. So we're about 8 months in, and they assure you it's a 12-month process from the very beginning to the very end. And so that's the pathway I took.
Oh, okay. Well, good. So it's going to be out in January.
First week in January, yes.
Now, I know from some of your posts, you have pre-sale going on, or is it already all?
Just concluded yesterday. Yes, sir. And that's part of the approach, because they know that, whether it's a student at Georgetown or somebody else that wants to go down this path, that it's difficult to come up with the funds to pay for all the folks that are in, the editor and the copyright folks and the cover designer. If you went out independently and hired these folks, it would be unreasonable. So they have a package deal where if you do the pre-sale, you get people to support you. So when it's printed, you've already got lots of people that are behind you, lots of people that will go to the event, in which everybody that purchased a book in advance will have a new book right here in Sequatchie, or an event in Sequatchie County, as well as other areas. The reach of this was amazing. I actually had people went 12 states in DC that said, I want to be a part of this. I want my name in your book. I want to be acknowledged that I supported you, and I want a ticket to the event so that we can meet at the book signing. And so that's all completed today. But certainly after January, we'll have it available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, what you have to do to really reach a larger audience.
Right. And now, in your book, you talk about different things, but primarily this is your experience in Iraq. Is that correct?
Yeah, 1 year in Iraq, yes, sir.
And I imagine that from all the videos I've seen from, that wasn't a pretty time, was it?
No, and a lot of reasons, and I'll just comment briefly on one of the things that is most notable about it, and I do have a passage, if we have time, maybe read it as a sample, but the difference in the weather patterns, right? You're in the middle of the desert, and it's 120 plus degrees. I arrived or left July 4th of 2004, and 120 plus degrees, is, even if it's a dry heat, is really difficult. And then you think about all the equipment you have. So we're not talking about the enemy, the threat, anything else. That's just your normal existence, and so that's a challenging, just the living conditions, and so that's something I share early on in the book, and I think people will find that interesting, because we might see a news, well, not anymore, but certainly at that time frame we had a lot of news accounts of what was going on, and you can see it and you can hear people talking, but you can't feel it. So I try and bring the reader into the experience so they can feel, hear, see, understand the emotions of the moment. And I think, again, with the help of a developmental editor, that adds value to the reader to actually understand not what they saw on television or in a movie or a video game, but what was it like from somebody that was there.
Well, that's it. Because I know one of the things I remember for some people who were there, they saw a lot of people wearing gloves, and they said, well, we have to wear gloves because everything is hot.
Yes, absolutely. You think, you get in your car here and you think how hot it is in the summer. Could you imagine if it's 120 or 130 on the highs every day throughout the summer? That's a different experience.
And staying hydrated,
Absolutely. Absolutely, it's critical. It's you get stranded somewhere and you run out of water. It's a life, it's a threat to your life, not necessarily the enemy, but that condition right there.
Well, and then you mentioned you have some of the things here. Let's talk about that. Some of the things
Sure.
you have here.
Let me point out just a couple things, and I thought this might help the viewers kind of have an understanding. Now, what I did, folks may not know, but Stars and Stripes is a publication that they send out to the war zone, we'll say, whether it's Afghanistan or Iraq or others, and it really helps keep the soldiers informed, and it gives you a chance to connect with the real world. Now, they do talk about things going on over there, right? In this case, there are bonuses for Special Operations Forces, but they also talk about other things, like they talk about quarterback McNabb and the Eagles and the Falcons, the sports world. So they talk about some of the things back home. It really kind of connects you back there. So I have about 100 of these. Now, they didn't publish them every day, but I've sent some back home so my family would have an understanding. But now I'm referring back to these in my book, so it's just not what's in my journal, but what was going on that, maybe I didn't have firsthand knowledge, something that was going on like this, but something of interest to the reader. So I think this really will resonate, and it makes it more full, rather than here's what Bob did on Tuesday and Thursday. It's kind of the big picture things. And I want to point out just a couple other things, Glenn, because they really relate to today. And I served in an international division. It means there's 21 other nations. I mean, we had folks from so many countries that it was just amazing to me. And a lot of civilian contractors were there serving as well, truck drivers and others. But the Armed Forces of the Republic of Poland, I went to Poland in the early 90s, and our Polish soldiers that we know right now, we're backing them up in their country because they're under threat, as we know in Eastern Europe. And they are a NATO partner. But Ukraine, we know there's a lot about what's going on in Ukraine. Well, part of my responsibility was under detainee operations was to work with these different countries that had detainees through their operations, and we had to get them somewhere secure. And so I worked hand in hand with Ukrainian military there, and we see now what they're dealing with being under attack by Russia. And it's sad. I often wonder. I wonder if those I served with who were in their 20s are now in their 40s. Or I imagine serving in some capacity now. And it's interesting because not many people recall that. Maybe they think about, okay, we sent forces, but the fact is we had so many other nations, Spain and Lithuania, and so many, just the laundry list of countries. And we worked well together, and we trained well together. And maybe just a couple more items here. We know there's soldiers love to play cards, right? They're downtime. There's always downtime no matter what. And that's the worst because you're thinking of home and you're missing family. But this was U.S. military history, heroes, a deck of cards, and it shows, aircraft pilots and Navy sailors and Army and generals. And it's just kind of a keepsake. At the time, it was interesting, but that was about it. But it's, it kind of brings me back to the folks that were in charge back then in terms of the generals. And I'll just tell you, one of the things they give you when you leave, of course, that you become to appreciate the chaplains really well. And Sunday becomes an important day, if you're not on a convoy or a mission where you can take some time to go to church. But, camouflaged in green, but the New Testament here is an example. But, they said historically, there's no atheist in a foxhole. You have a time to reflect because there's no assurance you're going to get home. Even if you're a mechanic and you're flying from point A to point B, if that plane goes down or helicopter, it doesn't distinguish you whether you're special forces or you're a cook, or you're, some other truck driver. And so everyone there is at risk. And so you haven't, and I talk about it in the book, there's not just an emotional roller coaster, but a spiritual roller coaster, a physical roller coaster that most that served are on. So I try and remind the reader about those experiences that the everyday soldier, sailor, Marine, airman would have.
Right. My wife has a cousin that served in Afghanistan. He was in the Army Reserve, and while he was on base, some mortar rounds came over and he got hit from the shrapnel. And so that was, he was more into the trucks and mechanic part of the, and you never know. That just came over the fence. Those mortars came over the fence, and it was just somewhere where he was.
And that's the first attack that I write about in my book. We arrived there in early July. It was hot. We're getting acclimated. We're going on some convoys to Baghdad, about 3 hours up and back. But on a day in August, we had 8 mortars that went over the wall and landed just sporadically throughout our areas. I was in a small building. I described where I was, what I was doing. But we had, I think, 3 Polish soldiers and several civilians get injured because of the mortar attack. You can put a wall as high as you want, but that doesn't stop that. You don't have a net to catch those, right? And so that was one of several events that I talk about when, we were really in harm's way and we really had folks that were physically injured in our area. That again makes you reflect. But for space and time, I could have been standing over there where they were, right?
You sure could have.
So it brings some reality to it of what the risk really is.
Well, and things like, and I know this is not what we're talking about, but like Tunnels to Tower.
Yes.
Those programs, and when I see those, I almost just want to cry because those some gave all, of their life, but these guys lost limbs and things that we can never give back.
Yeah, and it's been so long, and I know it's been a year since our last troops were out of Afghanistan. We certainly still have operations throughout the world, many that we don't know of personally because they're classified, but are people starting to forget? And I'll just comment quickly. I remember when I left and I went through Dallas, we had folks coming up to us and saying, good luck, thank you for your service. Many of them were Vietnam veterans with their hats on that didn't get a welcome or a friendly word.
No,
they were there to tell us, wishing us all the best. But what was so interesting when I came back, and I'm not saying this happened, but whether it was in El Paso near Fort Bliss or it was connecting a flight in Atlanta, there was no crowds welcoming us back. And I'm not saying that it was anything like Vietnam. I'm just saying that I wondered in my mind, had things changed in a year from 04 when we were going, or is it just that people had the day off to volunteer that day to welcome us back? And you think about today, there is a lot of support in Sequatchie County area, but there's parts of the country where it's not very supportive necessarily of our troops right now.
Right.
And so I wanted with this book to bring back to the reader that we need to remember these folks that served, and many that still are, because I think as a community we have an obligation not to forget those that fought long ago, those that never went to war, but they're just our citizen soldiers at our local National Guard unit.
Right.
We need to show our appreciation, because in a moment we could have a 9/11. Here we are just a few days ago from 9/11, and all of a sudden those folks are in harm's way. So we need to remember that, and that was another goal of my book.
Well, and our citizens today need to remember, that, especially those that don't support the military, that it's because of the military they get to not support the military.
Yes, yeah, and again, those in the military, you may not like it every day what you do. Think about basic training, but there's a purpose behind it, and eventually, those in the military look back, I think, mostly with admiration for that experience and pride in that experience. Even though we wouldn't all get up at 4 in the morning and do physical fitness training or go on a convoy to Baghdad, but we realized the bigger picture and what we signed on for.
Well, and just the whole idea is the discipline. I think the discipline helps a lot of people, because especially you have a lot of 18-year-olds that go in there that maybe they're not disciplined in high school, but when they get in the military they realize, hey, there's somebody else.
Absolutely, and I'll just add that discipline is a purpose. It's not just because they want to yell, I'll say, but it's because they want you to be disciplined. So when there's an IED that detonates and you need to call in a medical helicopter, that you are very, even though you wish that didn't happen, you're very disciplined about it. You do it in a correct way, in a prompt way, and I had that experience. I write in the book where I had a friend that was injured from an IED in front of our convoy, and again, I'd done that so many times in training, but this was the real deal. If you mess it up, guess what? They may not find you. And so that discipline is more than just that they don't want to yell at you and put you under stress. They want you to be able to respond in a stressful situation.
Well, especially if an IED or something goes off, an explosion, or you get shot at, you better be thinking.
Absolutely. So I write about that, and hopefully that helps the reader kind of have an understanding. I'll just share one thing if you can.
Sure.
I also have a lot of things I haven't got out of that box for 18 years, and they're cards and postcards my kids and my wife sent, and again, their ages were 12, 14, and 16. My experience with a 16-year-old is, they don't talk a lot. They have their own thing, whatever that is going on. But my son wrote here in 2004, it's falling apart. Dad, Princess was our dog. Princess says she misses you. We all do. Love, Bobby. So again, for a 16-year-old boy, and it just makes such a difference when you get these. Even though we had the internet, right, and we had email from time to time, it really made a difference. And so by writing this book, it caused me to go back and reflect on the support, not only from my family, but from others. So maybe it'll remind others that, when they served in the military, even if it was stateside, basic training, they got that letter from family, it really made a difference in their lives at that time.
Well, as you mentioned, if the families are living on base, they have people near them they can talk to while their husbands are away, or their wives, whatever the situation. But if they're living at home, like here in Dunlap, and not on a base, they may not have anybody they can talk to.
Absolutely, and that was really the premise of this book, entitled Citizen Soldier. Not that I have anything in for my son and other family members were on active duty, and that's fine, but the citizen soldier is unique. It's so separate than somebody on a military base. And I was just at Fort Campbell a few days ago, and I really value and honor our active duty forces. But as a citizen soldier, that dates back before our country, right? The Continental Army, and so it's quite a history. And our reserve forces, they're so large that just in case we need them, they're trained and ready to go. And so the citizen soldier has to leave their civilian job, they have to leave their home, not the military base, and then they come back later. But I write about that uniqueness of a citizen soldier, and hopefully that lets the reader understand a little better, because maybe they've had no exposure to the National Guard or the Reserve Forces.
Well, our Guard unit here went to Iraq. They were the first. I understand they were some of the first U.S. Soldiers in Iraq from where they came.
And many of those units, like right here in Dunlap and Sequatchie County, were small towns with the local armory that the men and women that drilled there month after month, year after year, and some just got done with basic training, they went to report, and all of a sudden their unit was deploying.
Yeah.
So, it could be that they've been there a long time, or others that just joined the unit, but it just puts in perspective that our citizens are standing by ready to respond to protect our nation.
Well, Bob, is there anything else you want to add to that we've maybe left out or not mentioned?
Well, what I could do is just give a quick snippet of just a paragraph or two of one of the
Sure, go right
chapters.
ahead.
All right. So this talks about, or I refer to, this is the 5th chapter. So I talk about leading up to departing, the year there, and then what happens afterward in the book. But I'll just share with you a couple paragraphs. So months of anticipation, weeks of training, days in the Kuwaiti heat, and we were moments away from stepping onto Iraq soil. Great uncertainty hovers over the team as we sense the landing will be very soon. The C-130 cargo plane is not a passenger aircraft, but rather one designed to transport everything from ammunition to vehicles. The web seats provide space for soldiers to sit shoulder to shoulder. "Armor up," yelled the young woman, the crew chief of the North Carolina National Guard aircraft. 15 minutes out, she added, over the roar of the C-130 engines. No doubt she was talking to us, as only our 11 team members and 3 Marines returning from R&R were in the massive cargo bay of the aircraft. The team members promptly donned the heavy individual body armor with ceramic plates in the chest and back pockets and their Kevlar helmets. I wondered what the 3 Marines and that crew chief had experienced in their tours and what they must have thought about these 11 newbies just getting into country. Our 470-mile flight from Kuwait was nearly over after starting with a glitch. The scheduled 4 a.m. departure was delayed until 8:30 a.m. And suddenly, I sensed the plane losing altitude. The 20,000 feet cruising level was quickly changing. I watched the crew chief. She did not seem alarmed. That's good, I thought. This must be the normal approach method, not a standard Delta flight. As we descend, all 11 of the Army National Guard members are occupied with their own thoughts in anticipation of flying into a place where we know each day brings risks.
Oh, that's neat.
Just a passage, but I think that kind of frames the content. I'm talking about what I'm feeling, what I'm seeing, what I'm hearing, and it brings the reader into the experience.
Yeah, and they've never been in one of those cargo planes. That's an experience.
Definitely an experience, and if they have been, they'll never forget, right?
That's right. That's right. Well, Bob, I certainly appreciate you being with us today and your time, and I'm excited to see the book when it comes out. So glad for you, and I'm glad you're doing this.
Thank you so much. First week in January, it'll be printed and shipped out, and it'll be available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, and I'll have hard copies and signings in the community, so I'm looking forward to that.
Because I'm going to get mine signed.
Excellent.
I appreciate it. Well, again, folks, we appreciate you watching our interview today, and you can, as always, you can see our interview on BTC Fiber's YouTube page, as well as BTC Fiber's Cable Channel 18. And again, let's don't forget our sponsors, Embers Ice Cream of Pikeville, Nickel Roll Antique of Pikeville, and White Wagon Bed and Breakfast of Pikeville. So until next time, have a great day. Hey everybody, this is Glenn Edison from Valley Views. We appreciate you watching our shows, and we would like for you to like, share, and follow us on Facebook, as well as like and subscribe to our YouTube page.